Com certeza, você já se deparou com a palavra enough. Será que você sabe usá-la do jeito certinho? Fica comigo que hoje eu vou te ensinar a usar essa palavrinha. Hey guys, what's up? My name's Kiernan and I'm your English teacher from Fluency Pass. When we're speaking English, there can be a few words that can be a little tricky to use, just like the word enough. So do you know how to use it properly? Do you use it before or afterwards when you want to indicate that something is the right amount? It's just enough. And how do we pronounce it? How do we stress it? So in this video, we'll explain everything. So starting off, when we're looking at enough in English, pode ser suficiente or even suficientemente. Depends on the case. And we can use it in ways when we're discussing the degree of something or the amount of something, whether it's sufficient or not. And we can usually use it in a context to talk about as much as we might need for something. So when pronouncing enough, we want to make sure that we pronounce it correctly with 2 syllables, enough. And looking at the phonetic symbols, you can see how this little apostrophe shows those 2 separate syllables, and we start with just and enough. Now in Portuguese, this can look a little similar to enough, and it's similar to the sound F, but a very short version of it. So enough is that quick final F at the end. Now the next question we have is, how does enough function? How do we use it in a sentence? Now this is the part that can be a little tricky for some people because its position may vary in a sentence depending on what else is in there. Depends on what the context is or what we're using it for. So when we use it with not, then we are trying to imply the opposite meaning of something. When we want to say something is not the right amount or less than the amount that we needed, we would say it's not enough. So for example, they aren't enough. I need more tomatoes to finish the recipe. So you don't have to stress that not at all, but just having that not and enough automatically lets the listener know that it's below the amount you need. So, do you have enough time to finish the test? There's not enough time. Now, it can also be used with nouns, adjectives, adverbs, or verbs by itself. We'll look at a few more examples moving ahead. All right, so starting with nouns, usually we'll just use enough in the noun, especially when we want to use it in a positive sense. So, just like before, we could say, I do have enough tomatoes. There are enough potatoes. There's enough celery for the recipe. Now we might use enough before the noun, especially when we want to imply something is negative, not enough, right? So I don't have enough water for us would be a perfect example. Let me go buy some more. In the last section, we can probably put adjectives and adverbs together because they're usually used right before the enough and they're kind of used right next to each other. They're pronounced quickly together. So enough is used after these types of words. And for example, we can say the car is fast enough. So the car, its fastness is sufficient for some need, some reason. Or for example, he is running enough, or she's close enough. Those all sound perfectly fine, and those are great ways to use an adjective or adverb to add a little more meaning or characteristic or specificity to what kind of enough we're looking at. Another example when we use enough is when it's just by itself. We can do this either positively or negatively. So for example, if we use it in a negative context, we can say there's a lot of food, but there's not enough for everyone. So remember, this is like our earlier definition of enough where we say sufficient. So it's not sufficient for everyone, all the people that are here. Another one of my favorite forms of enough is when we just use it by itself, like an interjection. So we can just say enough. So if someone says, they're arguing with us or something, we can say, enough, I'm done listening. So it's a great way to just use enough by itself. That's too much, we're saying. Now circling back to the adjective use, I want to show you a little trick that can often stump a lot of people. So it really matters whether we use enough before or after the adjective sometimes, because we can have 2 different meanings. So for example, let's look at, we haven't got big enough envelopes. If I put the adjective first, then we know that enough is being modified by that. So they're not big enough. They're too small for the letter we need. Now let's look what happens when we switch those. We haven't got enough big envelopes. Now it means we don't have the sufficient amount of these large envelopes. We have a few, but not enough. So you see, the first one, we might refer to the adjective big, but in the second one, we're only referring to the noun envelopes. So that position can really make a big difference. They're not big enough, or we don't have enough big envelopes. Another great phrase you might see pretty often is just enough of. So as you can guess with the preposition, we're saying sufficient of something. So we're definitely going to connect it to something. And we usually use a determiner or a pronoun after this. So our determiners, we might have a and the articles as well, or this, that, these, those, or maybe a pronoun like my, his, her, theirs, something like that. So for example, there isn't enough of that bread to make sandwiches for everyone. We can point at something as a determiner. Or I've seen enough of his work to be able to recommend him. Or there's enough of us to make a difference. So all those you can see enough of is followed by something. And last but not least, let's take a look at a few more very popular expressions that use enough. So the first one is that's enough.
All right, that's enough. That's enough for today.
So if we're pointing to something, or maybe the waiter's filling our glass of water at the table, we can say, that's enough, thank you. The second one is I've had enough. So maybe I'm eating too much, cake as a dessert and just be like, I've had enough, that's fine. Or it could be a little more negative if we're dealing with an unpleasant situation. We can just say, I've had enough, I'm leaving. The third one that's great is well enough.
At least, well enough for my own people.
So I use this a lot when someone asks how my day is, and we can sometimes, instead of just saying good, fine, average, we can also say well enough. It's sufficient. So the same thing, we're talking about the quality of something. So it's kind of like if someone's asked us how was the new movie, we say, it was good enough. I did well enough. Those are great expressions. Now a little more negative, you might hear the expression enough already.
Great, enough already.
Nice. So when we want to tell someone to stop, to shut up, or to stop doing something, we might say enough already. Quit doing that. So I've had enough of that. It's sufficient. Another great expression is fair enough.
Fair enough.
So kind of like everything else when we're using enough, fair enough modifies how much of that enough, and we say it's a fair amount, a good amount. We also use this as a response when somebody gives us an answer and we think it's a good enough answer, or that's all we needed. So if someone says, I can help you out at 10 a.m. tomorrow, we might say, all right, fair enough, that will work. The last one, we have enough is enough and sure enough.
No, enough is enough.
Sure enough.
Now these two are kind of similar in a way, but enough is a little more negative, where we just say enough is enough, kind of like saying that's enough. These similar expressions kind of show that we're fed up with something. We're just overwhelmed and we're saying that's too much. But the last one, sure enough, instead of saying, that negative enough is enough, sure enough is just the positive version of that, where we say, that's definitely guaranteed, or we say that sounds good to us. We can say, sure enough. Or we can even use it when we're expressing that something was a surprise. And we say, sure enough, he came the next day. All right, guys. Tudo que é bom chega ao fim. Eu espero que vocês tenham gostado desse vídeo e que possam usar o enough da forma certa daqui pra frente. Bye, te vejo no próximo vídeo.